Chapter 3.3, The Icy Balcony. I'm not sure how long I was out there, but it felt like hours. I'm sure it was at least 1 hour, and it was freezing. Finally, there was a scratching noise at the door. I heard the key turn and stood to attention, terrified that it would be Thievel. It was Miguel. Seeing his fat cheeks and bright red hair made me feel safe. I felt like hugging him, but somehow it seemed wrong, so I just stood there shivering. "Shh," he said as he opened the door. "What happened?" I asked. "Did I sleep in?" "Of course not," said Miguel, wrapping me up in a big blue blanket and taking me inside. "Someone put a spell on you, and we didn't realise until we were down at breakfast." "Who would do that?" I asked. "Who do you think?" asked Miguel. "I don't know." "Well, think harder." Miguel suddenly stopped. I could tell that he felt awkward. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing," said Miguel. "It's just that I'm in training to be a kindness wizard, so I'm trying not to be sarcastic." I nodded, wondering what a kindness wizard was. Miguel sighed. "I've always been embarrassed of my giant ancestors for being murderers and big haters." I smiled. "Is that why you want to add kindness to your skill set?" Miguel laughed. "Exactly," he said, "but don't tell anyone. Thievel hates kindness, thinks it's only for weak people and flamingos." "Darling would be horrified," I said, shivering and drawing the blanket up to my neck. "Sorry, mate," said Miguel. "Quick, hold these." Miguel produced 2 warm stones. They felt so good in my freezing hands. Then he wrapped me up in 2 more big thick blankets. "That'll warm you up," he said. "Careful," I said. "You don't want to be too kind." Miguel grinned. "What a nightmare," he said. I nodded. Thievel was so horrible before he threw me onto the balcony. Miguel blew some air out of his mouth and shook his head. He realised that I'm training to be a kindness wizard this morning. "What did he do?" I asked, feeling terrified for Miguel. "Threatened to hunt down my coach and have her killed." "No," I said, "that's awful. Who's your coach?" "Later," said Miguel. "Come on, we don't have much time. Thievel always has his goons patrolling this area, looking for anyone who's skipping class." When we started walking, I realised how numb my feet were. But once I got going, I was sort of okay, although I couldn't stop shivering. As I followed Miguel through the twisted corridors, my teeth were literally hitting against one another. Even though it was awful, I couldn't help thinking that this place would make a great game. I even started thinking about how we could put it all into our computer game. And then I started thinking about how quickly Miguel was moving. It was amazing. I felt so happy to see him walking. But I couldn't help wondering how he'd lost the use of his legs. It must have been so hard. Miguel led me into an old bathroom. "Don't take too long," he said, "but a bath will warm you up. I've put fresh clothes in there and the water should still be warm. I'll stand guard in case any spies turn up." I started to say thank you, but Miguel stopped me. "Hurry," he said. "We've not got much time." For a kindness wizard in training, Miguel was still fairly gruff. As I stepped into the bath, I was so grateful to be out of the cold. I wanted to stay there all day, but I knew I had to be quick. I let myself relax for about 2 minutes, and then I jumped out. The last thing I wanted was to be caught in a bath when I was supposed to be outside. The clothes Miguel had given me weren't very good, but they were better than nothing. Scratchy woolen trousers, a rough cotton shirt, and a jumper that made my arms itch. When I came out, Miguel frowned. "Where's your hat?" he asked. "I didn't see a hat," I said. Miguel sighed and waved his hand in front of my head. A black pointy hat appeared. "Put it on," said Miguel. "The new kids have to wear them all the time so that we know who needs help." Sounds almost kind, I said. It's not, said Miguel. If you ask me, it's so that Thievel and his cronies know who to pick on. I hope not, I said. Can't be helped, said Miguel. If you don't wear one, they'll beat you, so keep it on. How come Mudfog teaches magic, I asked. Isn't it an orphanage? All boys in the land of ice and fire have to be taught magic, said Miguel. If we learn mathematics or spelling or anything else, it's all based on the main subject, which is wizardry. I nodded, wondering how I was going to fit in. Do you know any magic? Asked Miguel with a frown. Not really, I said. Oh, that's all right, said Miguel. It's the clever ones they hate. Oh, I said, feeling sorry for Miguel and also for Blizzard. Do you know where Blizzard is? I asked. Will he know who I am, who we all are? He'll know me because we've known one another since we came to Mudfog, but he won't know the rest of you, said Miguel. Even if he did, Thievel would have interrupted his memory by now. He'd want to make him feel like he's 10 years old again. Thievel is completely without kindness. I shivered. How are we going to rescue Blizzard? I asked. Don't worry, said Miguel. Believe it or not, I've done this all before. Chapter 3.33 Finding Blizzard. Really? I asked. We're both time wizards, said Miguel. So we've been attacked a lot of times. Sometimes we return to this school just long enough to remind us that we loathed it. Miguel and I continued to find our way through the dark maze of corridors. The school was completely run down. Most of it looked as if it had been abandoned for decades. There were spiderwebs and clouds of dust everywhere, and sometimes the sound of rodents scurrying. I hated to think that children actually went to school there. It was so much worse than Lowood. Shh, said Miguel, stopping and putting up his hand. I stood in silence. I could hear someone whimpering. It sounded like a child or maybe a dog. Tiptoe, whispered Miguel. We kept going, but ever so slowly. The corridor ended in an abandoned classroom. It had one small window that looked out onto a dismal paddock covered with frost. Above the paddock were brooding clouds. The whole place gave me the creeps. A boy was sitting on the floor near the window. His head was resting on his hands and he was sobbing quietly. Miguel put his finger to his lips. We both walked over to the boy and sat beside him. He looked up at Miguel, his eyes sad. Did Thievel do this? Asked Miguel. The boy nodded, looking at me. Sorry, he said. I'm not in a good way. Miguel sighed. This is Ben, he said. Ben Mitchell, although we all call him Blizzard. The boy didn't look up again, and I was shocked to see how thin he was. His legs reminded me of broomsticks. You'd better go, mumbled Blizzard. Thievel will be back soon, and I don't want to see you punished. Miguel put his hand on Blizzard's back. I've been given permission to use invisibility, said Miguel. So if it's okay with you, Ben and I will be right here. Then we can report on the vicious Thievel. Blizzard looked up, and his sad brown eyes softened with a tiny bit of hope. Can I become invisible too? He asked. Miguel shook his head. Thievel has blocked you, he said. I heard today that the backstabber Invictus told Thievel that someone has figured out invisibility. He doesn't know if it's me, so I'm safe, but he's used his own pathetic magic to block you from any ability to disguise yourself or disappear. Blizzard rested his head on his knees. I could almost see waves of sadness crashing onto him. Come on, said Miguel, you can't stay here. They'll only beat me if I leave, said Blizzard, or beat someone else and make me watch. They'll say it's all my fault. They're such cowards, said Blizzard. Cowards with power, said Blizzard. Turning to me, he asked, "Where are you from?" Marescimar, but also Lowood. They're both a long way from here." "Run away," said Blizzard. "First chance you get, and find a portal. I've been trying to make one, but I can't seem to master it. But I've heard there's one in the village. Go there, find help." Blizzard's eyes looked mad, desperate. It was terrifying to see the man we loved so much in such a state of fear. It made me feel ill to know that he'd been so terribly harmed as a child. "You have to go," said Blizzard. "I saw 2 boys die last week. They had pneumonia. They were put out into the icy yard for 2 nights, and they caught colds, and then they got hacking coughs, and then they were gone." Blizzard buried his head back into his knees. Miguel put his hand on Blizzard's back. "It can't last," he said. "We won't let it."